So the problem isn't necessarily your brand and where it stands, but it's comparison saturation. And this is, I think, like a cousin of imposter syndrome, right? We always talk about like you are what you eat. And the idea of what you consume then affects your perception of what's going on, right? So if there's comparison saturation and you're constantly comparing yourself to people that you perceive are at your level or above your level, that you perceive are doing better than you or more creative than you or have cooler projects than you, it can really trigger that, like, okay, well, then what I'm doing is clearly broken, when that's not necessarily true, right? Greetings and welcome back to the Kiss My Aesthetic podcast. Today's solo episode is not only for you guys, but it's also for myself. And that's kind of why I've called it aesthetic fatigue and why you're bored of your brand and what to do about it. Maybe because I'm feeling stuck in this way. And so I wanted to just kind of kick out some ideas and explain where my head's at with where we go with branding. And where it evolves to now that we have kind of a first few months under our belt, new year, we're kind of settling into the thick of the quarter and really of this new kind of fiscal year. Hopefully everybody's working on their taxes and getting all that in order. But I think there's a tendency right now to get really distracted and to get really kind of sucked in a comparison spiral. And so if that is you or it's sounding like you, this episode is hopefully going to be really helpful for that. So without further ado, let's get into aesthetic fatigue and why you might be sick of your branding. First and foremost, if you're bored of your brand, that actually might mean that it's working. And I know that sounds contradictory to everything that I just said, but the reality is that you look at your brand more than anyone because it's your brand, right? So the feeling of looking at your own Instagram and thinking to yourself, this looks tired. This isn't me anymore. I want something new. I want new colors. I want to scrap everything and start over. What happens is that aesthetic fatigue is actually very normal. But reactive impulsively to those feelings can actually erode your authority. So go back to the aesthetic authority episode. That will be really helpful to you. Go back to building a brand empire, that 4-part series. That'll be really helpful to you. But I think it's very easy, especially if you're in a visual field or you're a creative business owner, it's very easy to think, I hate everything. I want to start over. And basically that same feeling of like when you're getting dressed to go out for the night and you try on all your clothes and you're like, I hate all my clothes. And you just want to throw everything on the floor and start over. I hope that this is the reminder that like, no, there are things that are still good here, right? There are still staples. There are still foundational pieces that we can keep. But how can we make this feel fresh again? So first we need to really like describe what aesthetic fatigue actually is. So aesthetic fatigue is when you become just absolutely overstimulated by your own visual repetition before your audience. So you may be looking at it and be like, ugh, this like landing page or this Instagram story, this piece of print material is so boring and I hate it and everything is ugly and terrible. What happens is that you, again, are exposed to that more than anyone else. You also consume new inspiration on the daily. So you have to remember from like brain psychology standpoint, right? Like you see your own stuff all the time. It's also this kind of like keeping up with the Joneses feeling of seeing what everybody else is doing. Your taste also evolves as you grow with your business. Again, the aesthetic authority episode is going to be really helpful to you here because your taste and what's interesting to you as you mature in your business is not going to be the same as it was day one, right? Like we're people, we evolve, we grow, all of those good things. And there's also kind of this confusion that happens between personal growth and brand instability. Because remember the analogy that I always give of like, if you are in school and every day you show up to class and the student that sits next to you every single day is dressed differently. One day they're a jock and the next day they're a nerd and the next day they're goth and then the next day they're punk and then the next day you would be kind of maybe a bit apprehensive of that person because you wouldn't know how to relate to them because they keep switching up their vibes. So I think there's a tendency with branding too and with entrepreneurs to get bored of what they're doing, see what everybody else is doing, and then think that they like constantly have to switch things up. The problem is this perception is what then gives people pause. It makes them kind of want to be like, oh, I don't know what they're doing. They're launching another service. They're launching another group program. They're doing a whole new color scheme. She's got a new brand name. It's a whole new website. That can kind of detrimentally affect how people approach your brand, right? Your authority comes from your consistency. What are the things that you're going to do well every single time, no matter what? And that can look different from business to business, right? The other thing is binging inspiration versus curating your identity can start to cause a lot of conflict. So if we think about, again, the endless scroll of like Pinterest, TikTok, Instagram. I mean, I'm seeing this with my friends that are planning their weddings right now, where their whole feed is absolutely saturated with like a bajillion things that they would have never otherwise been exposed to, which is both beautiful and overwhelming, right? That's also wonderful to get all these new ideas, but then it's also like psychologically instilling this feeling of like, oh, well, I didn't even think about XYZ, or I didn't even conceptualize ABCDEFG, and how much that can really start to like creep in a lot of doubt and creep in a lot of like reservations about your own self-loyalty. So go back to the episode with Hedva Lumiere from Consider Labs, where we talked about the concept of self-loyalty and having strong self-loyalty being kind of unmoored by changing tides, right? You're kind of settling into this is me and this is what I stand for, and all this other stuff swirling around me doesn't really affect me because like I know who I am and I know what I do and what I offer. However, there may be some very real reasons that you are bored. Again, the first, you're too close to it. You're looking at it too much. You've maybe stared at it for too long. You worked with a designer a really long time ago, and it feels maybe safe, but it feels kind of also like you're trapped. I think I'm feeling that way right now with like the apartment that I live in. I've been there for 5 years. It's a great apartment. I love where I live, but I'm kind of feeling like the walls are closing in on me a little bit. Like I'm starting to feel like I'm outgrowing it. I'm starting to feel like I'm using every inch of it and not being able to host in the way that I really want to. And so there's kind of this like perception of like, oh, well, this is it. This is all that I have. And not the idea of like, okay, what could it look like to kind of switch this up, right? But you're so close to it. However, to flip that coin, if you're a client who's being exposed to you for the first time, your consistency can actually come off as looking established. So the fact that somebody could come to my website, even though it's driving me nuts, and still see tons of projects that we're really proud of and tons of blogs and tons of podcast episodes, even if I'm maybe bored of the way that it looks or is coming together, to that client, the fact that we've been doing that look or that vibe for so long adds credibility to what it is that we're doing. The second reason you might be kind of bored of your brand aesthetic is that you're consuming too much. Let's be real, like it's pretty impossible to not doom scroll these days, and I am just as much in it as everyone else. And also that the trends of social media algorithms are such that if you like one thing once, all of a sudden your whole explore feed, your whole homepage of your socials is now giving you dog videos, right? You're like, man, I just thought that one dog video was funny. I don't need to see it 47 times, Instagram, TikTok. But it's kind of giving this feeling of like the perception that, oh, everyone is also seeing all the things that I'm seeing. So if I'm following, for example, all of my competitors and I'm seeing what they're doing and I'm seeing them do it really well over and over and over and over and over again, it's really easy to think to myself, oh, well, all of my work looks like shit, right? That's a very easy jump. But it's also because I would not have been exposed to those people if I were not actively participating and engaging in their content. So when everything else looks new, it feels like what you're currently doing looks repetitive. So you're seeing this person and that's spinning you off to this person, that's spinning you off to this person over here. And you're like, damn, everybody else has got it way more going on than I do. It can start to feel like, okay, then everything that I'm doing is bad, which is not the case, right? It's your perception of what you consume is your reality in that situation. So the problem isn't necessarily your brand and where it stands, but it's comparison saturation. And this is, I think, like a cousin of imposter syndrome, right? We always talk about like you are what you eat. And the idea of what you consume then affects your perception of what's going on, right? So if there's comparison saturation and you're constantly, constantly comparing yourself to people that you perceive are at your level or above your level that you perceive are doing better than you or more creative than you or have cooler projects than you, it can really trigger that, like, okay, well, then what I'm doing is clearly broken when that's not necessarily true, right? The other issue is that maybe you've outgrown your execution of your brand, not necessarily your positioning. So, this can be like a subtle shift. It could be, for example, like we just up leveled all of our YouTube thumbnails. It's still very much in the same brand, but I said, you know what I'm noticing is that the people that I follow on YouTube, they don't use people's like professional headshots as the thumbnail. They're using like a screen grab from the video. So that was a really simple swap that we did. And now like our YouTube feed is looking okay, like a little bit more up to par, a little more consistent with what I'm noticing that people are doing on YouTube, right? So it's maybe not necessary that you need a new brand, but you could need, for example, some updated photography, maybe some stronger art direction, maybe some better elevated typography and hierarchy within your typography, which is something that we are going to be revisiting here quite shortly because I can't stand any of the fonts on our website or socials. So I'm in that spot also of like figuring out how can we make this look more like what it feels like to work with us. And that's really kind of an evolution of taste and an evolution of exposure and not necessarily a failure of the brand. So for example, like as our brand continues to grow and we work more towards like hospitality and luxury and product-based brands, I want our assets to reflect that versus now I feel that maybe the typography that we have, even though I love our colors and I love our logo, our typography is maybe a bit too like bold and harsh and maybe a little bit too corporate even. Doesn't have the same level of like fun or whimsy in it that it could. And so that's something that I think that even we could revisit. The next reason you're probably bored of your brand as it currently stands is that you're chasing dopamine. So rebranding is something that feels productive and it feels like forward motion, but sometimes it can just be a big fat procrastination. Sometimes there are other things in your business that aren't working effectively for you. Therefore, you blame the brand. And as a brand designer, like this is definitely the case. Like I've definitely talked to people on discovery calls where they're explaining their business to me and I say, I don't really know if right now is the right time that you want to rebrand because maybe you need to revisit your rates. Maybe you need to refine your offer. Maybe you need to start reaching out to bigger clients or going deeper into your thought leadership. There's all of these different places to rebuild your business, and branding is a chunk of that, but it is not the catch all be all of turning your business around. Like just because you're bored, going in and trying to approach your rebranding is not to me like going to be a good return on your investment of like doing it because you just don't like how it looks or you're bored of how it looks. We need to really rebrand with intention because if you're a person that's going to be rebranding every year, that can give your audience whiplash and that can start to degrade your aesthetic authority. It can start to jeopardize how people know you and refer you and bring you business if you are going to forego that consistency, right? The other thing is rebranding too often can be very expensive. So, tying it back to kind of your authority, right? Inconsistency is going to start to erode your recognition. If people know you as like, oh, the girl that wears yellow, and then all of a sudden everything I do is blue, then that kind of starts to jeopardize the connection point, right? Recognition also helps to build trust. So that's know, like, trust. Remember in the aesthetic authority feedback loop, we talked about if you have strong aesthetic authority, then clients feel like they trust you more. When they trust you more, you make better decisions. When you make better decisions, you have better work. When you have better work, you have a stronger portfolio. And then when you have a stronger portfolio, it attracts more clients and how that whole cycle starts to feed itself, right? So the recognition building trust here is really huge. And also that trust is what builds you revenue, like I just described. So when you change your branding, and when I'm talking about rebranding, I'm saying like, we're going to change everything top to bottom, like fonts, colors, logos, tones, like photography style, art direction, etc. When you change that constantly, your audience never really builds a strong connection to you. They kind of start to reset their perception every time they're exposed to your content, and you look kind of more exploratory instead of established. Now, I will say for those of us that are creatives, like we have a creative service to offer, there's a little bit more wiggle room here than I think the average brand. And I think you might have maybe seen this when we do what we call like a social flood on our feeds. And I've talked about this on solo episodes before. Is like we like to share our project recaps in kind of a deep dive series of anywhere from 12 to 15 posts. And that really lets us like get in the weeds of our creative process and tell the whole story of how a project came together over multiple pieces of content. So it may look like our brand is rebranding maybe in those big chunks, but what's consistent from project to project is those types of posts. So we'll always have a continuous scroll carousel, we'll have a logo pop on, we'll have a work in progress kind of reel. So the delivery of that content is kind of the brand in a sense of like the having that consistency and having that through line. And then we're always kind of coming back to center. So think about this if you have like a product based business or a service based business, when you're in launch mode, your brand might take one step to the left, one step to the right, one forward, one back, right? Off of central, off of those main colors, main fonts, main styles. But as soon as that thing is over, you're coming back to center. You're stepping right back into your aesthetic authority, right back into your branding, and right back into what people know you for. So again, not to say that it has to be all black or white or has to be all one way or the other, but notice that when you do stray from your branding, you need to give yourself an opportunity to come back to center and come back to that, the core of what it is that you offer, right? So for example, good designers are still going to find ways to evolve on this, right? So a really great designer and a really great way to get through to the other side of this aesthetic fatigue is to actually like work with other creatives. See your brand through their eyes, right? Good designers still get art directed because authority isn't just talent, it's actually perceived stability, right? So authority isn't just like, hey, I'm bitching and so therefore I'm the one to talk to about this. It's actually through like this person has done this not only well one time, but many, 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 many times. And then that's what's leading to your credibility, is leading to your authority. Now, all this said, you could be listening to this episode and say, okay, that's great, Michelle, but like, I still think I need a rebrand. In which case, this is how to know that it's actually probably a really great time to rebrand. So first, there's a few questions to go through. One, has your ideal client changed? Has your core offer changed? Has your positioning changed? Or are you just feeling visually restless? The other thing I'll throw in here as an option is, are you at kind of a milestone or a tipping point? Are you hiring employees? Are you hitting a 5-year anniversary? Are you expanding your product suite or offer, right? So it's back to the core offer has changed. But that tends to be a really great time to rebrand because you can kind of retrospectively pull in all the things and diagnostically look at, okay, what worked and what are we happy to let go of? Like, what are the things that people really know us for and that I want to maintain as like the true core of what we do and who we help and all those things? And what are the things that I'd be like, I think I can let that go. So for me, that's like our typography. Like, I think our brand typography on a whole, I'm like really not married to. So that one feels fine to switch up. However, our color palette may go through like little shifts and evolves and changes year to year, but at the core, it's going to be bright yellow. It's going to be so recognizable and it's going to be really punchy. And those are things like you'll never see our brand do like, well, I guess never say never, but it's very unlikely that you'll see our brand switch everything over to neutrals because that's not us, right? So to go back to those questions to ask yourself, one, has my ideal client changed? Has the industry that we're working in changed? Has the type of person, the demographic of person change? Are there other qualities about who I like working with that we can cater to more? That's a really good thing to think about. Has the core offer changed? So your services, your product, your kind of promise, your bigger mission, has that changed? Has your positioning changed? Meaning, are there now more competitors in your space? Did you look around and realize that all your competitors are using the same shade of red? That might be a really nice time to rebrand, right? And what does that mean for you in the long run, right? Like, how can your branding or rebranding at that point really help to either solidify or differentiate yourself from greater positioning? And then again, am I just visually restless or is this just like boredom? Like, is this just coming out of straight boredom and comparison and like wanting to find something to fix that feels productive? Because that already is kind of a bit of a disqualifier for rebranding. So make sure that there's a rebranding with a function, because once you do it, it's not like you can A/B test a rebrand, right? I say this all the time on discovery calls. You're either doing it or you're not. And so if you're doing it, you can't also really go backwards. Like we saw Cracker Barrel do that, and what a mess that was, right? So think about the impact of that and take that into consideration and weigh that against your maybe just restlessness or aesthetic fatigue. Hey KMA, as you're building your business, you're also building your community, but you might be feeling like all the tools that you need to do so are starting to weigh you down. You've got your website and socials, maybe also an app for video hosting, a calendar tool for your events, a payment processor, a community hub, a chat app, and maybe even an email newsletter, and yet you still don't feel like you can talk to all of your people at once. Social media algorithms are hiding your carefully crafted posts, and the rise of AI slop is turning people off from communities at a time that we need them the most. It's getting harder and harder to know if you're connecting with a real human being online. And none of these apps that were meant to make your business run smoother actually talk to each other all that well. As a result, your community feels fragmented and you're losing your marbles constantly switching between tabs. This is quite literally a death by 1,000 paper cuts. Heartbeat, however, presents a solution. Heartbeat is an all-in-one community hosting platform that brings together your chats, courses, live events, and payments under one single roof. Heartbeat lets you own your data and your revenue without the technical headache, enabling you to host the community that you've always dreamed of. Stop managing software and start hosting your people. Ready to build your own community hub? Head to heartbeat.chat/KMA to start a free trial. No credit card required. But if you're ready to go ahead and upgrade, you can use KMA 30 to get you 30% off when you're ready to level up. And because you're a listener of the podcast, I'd like to take the time to personally invite you to join our community on Heartbeat. Head to heartbeat.chat/kissmyaesthetic, also linked in today's show notes, and we will see you there. However, if you got to the end of those questions and you said, okay, maybe I don't need to rebrand, what should I do instead? Like, what would make this feel fresher to me? What would make me feel excited about my business again? And the first thing is to kind of just run a little micro elevation sprint. So pick one or two areas that could use a level up. Maybe it's photography. Maybe it's your social media templates. Maybe it's your mock-ups in your portfolio or your website hierarchy. Maybe it's just your copy. Like you can have better copywriting. So keeping the same core identity, but leveling up one area at a time allows you to kind of really suss out and measure like, okay, what's going to have the most impact, but also what's going to get me closer or what's going to scratch that itch? What's going to scratch that itch of feeling like it's new, but we get to stay mostly the same. So again, if we're going to use the analogy of like going through your closet and trying on every single piece of clothing that you have and hating all of them, it's like, okay, maybe I don't hate all of my clothes. I just like need some new shoes. I just want to switch out my shoes because my shoes are old and these ones are cracked and this one, the heel's broken and da-da-da. And so if I had new shoes, would that make my whole outfit better? Would that make getting dressed better? Right? So I think there's a way to kind of do that as like a little micro elevation, like finding one or two things to like tweak your level up at a time to kind of see if that is satisfying that feeling of being bored with your brand. And if it ultimately solves your business problems, right? The second is to introduce controlled novelty. So this is what I was talking about as far as like posting things in almost like a campaign or a launch period. So when we wrap with brands and we finish their branding, we now like help them do a coordinated launch. So it's a launch package, right? And so it's they're posting about their brand, we're posting about their brand. We're trying to maximize the number of eyeballs that are looking to the stuff, but there's other ways you can do this too, right? So introducing seasonal colors, introducing editorial style campaigns, maybe doing like limited visuals deep dives, right? So for holidays or for events or for initiatives, maybe you're starting a podcast or a show or some adjunct to your brand, can it have, again, that like cousin quality where it's like it looks related, but they're not twins. They're cousins of each other, which is how I consider like Kiss My Aesthetic versus MKW Creative Co., right? Is can you have that limited visual capsule that's like, here's a thing that's similar, but not the same. The other would be content themes. Can you find ways to come back to content themes, whether that's in your email, your social, in your speaking materials, and the way that you even talk to clients that can kind of revive that otherwise like stagnant feeling of being like bored with your brand? The third option would be evolve and don't replace. So again, thinking your brand like a wardrobe, we don't need to burn it down. We need to just like find ways to like tailor it. So maybe it's swapping accessories. Maybe it's like actually taking the pants in that don't fit right and getting them like custom fit to your body. Maybe it's kind of getting rid of stuff, right? Like getting rid of the stuff you're not using and kind of clearing that mental space of like, I'm not bored of my brand. I just have a bunch of stuff that's like, like I bought it in 2017 from H&M and like, do I still need to hold on to it? Like I'm 32. Like, no. Right. So finding ways to just evolve, not necessarily replace. So like if there's something that you even loved about your brand and you thought it was working really well, but it's not serving you in the way that you know it could, can you level that part up? So photography here is a great example, right? Maybe even your website. Maybe you like your website, but you're like, it's not as functional as I want it to be. Can you level up that thing? Like it's still the thing, but can you add more delight and surprise elements? Can you add more animations? Can you work with a developer that can really deliver the vision that you have for something like a website, right? Lastly, from the bigger perspective, if we need to zoom all the way out of this topic of aesthetic fatigue, right? And figuring out why are we feeling bored with our brand and why is this feeling overwhelming and why does everything suck? It's realizing that your audience is just now noticing the thing that you're tired of. So if you zoom out, if you're getting tired of it, there may also be a way that your audience is also feeling a bit tired of it, which maybe contradicts my point from the beginning, right? The point from the beginning saying switching your vibe up all the time might jeopardize your brand. But if it is true that like you've outgrown your brand has outgrown you, there is a misalignment happening here, you are needing a rebranding, there's also a chance your audience could be catching on, right? So consistency feels boring to the creator, but maybe your consistency has also led to people tuning you out. Because if it's not grabbing their attention and there's no novelty in it anymore, maybe there is a chance that you could reconsider, right? That is going to happen again incrementally over time. So I think the suggestions from this episode of like, don't burn the whole house down, don't throw out the whole wardrobe, don't throw out all the ingredients in the kitchen. Like, let's keep the things that we know are good and let's level up the things that we know could just be 10, 20, 30% better. And in that 10, 20 to 30% better category, is that where we can introduce some novelty for our audience? Is that where we could like feel refreshed again, right? So for example, we have had the Kiss My Aesthetic Facebook group for so long now. And the Facebook group, to be quite honest, has kind of fallen to shit. Engagement, terrible. Like the amount of users that used to be on Facebook and now when I go look at our members, it says inactive account, like kind of breaks my heart. But people are not on Facebook anymore. So maybe it's not Facebook that we're collecting on anymore. I've now found this new platform called Heartbeat, which I'm very excited about because the core of what we are doing by having this community arm of the business is to help designers and to help creatives and ultimately to help our clients. So if I can then just migrate that to a new thing and start fresh there, then maybe we don't need to, tear the whole thing down and be like, we don't have a community offer anymore, da 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 da. We just needed to find a new tool. And that's already inspired me and like gotten me into the energy of like, okay, like maybe we can build this back up again. And in my conversation with the founder on the last podcast episode, we talked about how it's not about talking to 40,000 people anymore. It's about talking to 400. It's about talking to that like special group that's going to be diehard, that's going to be invested in what you're doing and where you're going, because there's this fallacy between like amalgamating huge amounts of followers that if they're not converting, then that's a lot of time talking to people that aren't actually moving the needle in your business, right? So remember, the repetition is what helps to build the authority, familiarity, and market memory. So great example, when we set up the new group on Heartbeat, I made sure that we had the same cover photo, the same logo, the same functionality as the Facebook group. So that transition, there's like a consistency there, right? There's an authority, there's a familiarity, even though it's a new URL. The idea is that we want to host a very similar type of group, just in a new setting, right? Market memory is what helps people think, oh yeah, that's for me, right? So if they remember being in the Facebook group, they remember Kiss My Aesthetic, they know that they're part of the podcast, creating that consistency in all the places that we show up is going to help us. So all of that to say, if you're bored of your brand, that actually might mean that you've finally repeated it enough to matter. You've gotten to a place where you're bored of it because you are the one seeing it all the time, not necessarily your audience. So The goal isn't necessarily to impress yourself. The goal is to actually impress the person that wants to work with you or that wants to collaborate with you. So remember that like feeling bored or feeling unsettled in your brand could be an indicator that it's time to rebrand, but it also could just be an indicator that something needs to level up, something needs to switch up, something needs to evolve. And we don't need to like throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like we can find a way to do that approachably and sustainably and incrementally instead of just like burning the whole house down, even if that feels like what we want to do ultimately. There's a lot of reasons to want to burn the house down these days. So, all that to say, I hope this episode was helpful to you. I hope this helped to explain a little bit where my head's at, where we're feeling stuck, what that kind of next chapter looks like, and know that this is like a constant evolution and practice, right? Like owning a business, especially as a creative, you're never going to be finished. It's never going to be done, right? Like it's never going to be like everything that we do is amazing and perfect. It's a fallacy. So letting go of some of the pressure of yourself to be like, you know what, I'm going to get 10% better at this, 20% better at that. And just know that as soon as you fix this one, as soon as you fix the leak over here, something's going to break over there, right? As soon as we put new paint on the front of the house, the backyard grass is all brown, right? So finding those ways to kind of stay nimble and stay flexible in that evolution, I think is also like part of giving yourself permission to sometimes just feel bored, feel burnout, feel overwhelmed. I would be remiss to let you guys go without telling you, if you did listen to this whole thing and you're like, yeah, no, still want to rebrand, like I still need a professional's opinion, please don't hesitate to reach out with us. We are booking projects for the summer at this time. So if you have a brand that needs a level up, if you maybe DIY'd and you're kind of hitting that point where you're like, I need to look a lot more professional. If there are competitors that have entered your space and are kind of still in your thunder and you need that new positioning to get you, up and above and beyond where you're currently at, then please don't hesitate to reach out. Our website, mkwcreative.co/contact. And we look forward to chatting with you. Thanks so much, guys. We'll catch you next time. Bye.